once if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. There we are. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, and I hope day one of the AI Summit has lived up to or exceeded your expectations. We're excited to be together today on day two of the summit, and we'll have a busy half day together. We have a special treat this morning, a student soapbox speech. To introduce our student speaker, Superintendent Michael Matsuda.
Thank you. Good morning. For a week. There's been so much networking and talking and learning from each other. We're getting really, really good feedback. I just want to, I know we have a soft lunch and kind of a grab and go lunch, but we encourage you to stay. I just want to open it up and get some feedback from you about this conference and beyond. We hope to be able to host a conference next year. In 2017, I was invited to India by my good friend, the former mayor of this great city, Tom Tate, who is known for kindness and creating a city of kindness. I was invited to have an hour and 20 minutes alone with Tom and His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And of course, I said, yes, I'm in. I'd love to meet him. And we went to Delhi, and I had some time with just a great spiritual being. And the reason why he was interested in, I guess, meeting me, because I represented, metaphorically, all the educators in the world. And we, with Tom Tate and I, we really were trying to make kindness real. And it's more than just a smile. It's more than just our prayers and thoughts are with you. It's really about taking action. And His Holiness said, the guy really has an aura, and you feel it, you feel that energy and that love, because he's always smiling. And he laughs very like that. It's endearing. And he said, the challenge with the United States, this was in 2017, is that many adults need emotional hygiene. He laughed like that. He goes, you need emotional hygiene. But we had a deeper conversation about the purpose of education. And he said, the future of the world is in your hands. And really, educators need to be more intentional about education and educating. And we had a really interesting conversation about empowering young people with their own, through compassion and affirmation of who they are, and giving them spaces to share who they are. And fast forward, I had a chance to meet some amazing leaders in our business and corporate world. AUHSD has about 115 corporate partners, and nearly all of them say that it is so important that young employees have a sense of purpose and belonging in the organization that they choose. And I think that's so true, more true now than ever before, that we educators need to build spaces for students to share who they are, to affirm their identity, affirm their stories, and listen to voice. And I think that we are at a very critical juncture in this country and in the world. And so in Anaheim Union High School District, we've instituted all types of ways for students to express themselves through student voice. And some years ago, we sent a number of teachers, myself included, to Chicago to be trained in the mikvah soapbox speech. And again, I want to put a shout out to Brian Brady, because he led that nonprofit for many, many years. Where's Brian? Yeah. That really influenced me, because basically the soapbox speech is a truncated TED Talk. TED Talks are only 15 minutes, 2 to 4 minute speeches that affirm a student's identity and voice. But what we also did in Anaheim is we grafted that speech. The kid would then think about what their purpose was and what they wanted to do with that purpose. And hence, I think it made our civic engagement grow, because oftentimes when you find your purpose, you want to do something about it. And it could be writing letters, or it could be presenting to the school board or the city council, or, figuring out what level of government, for example, is responsible, who's responsible, who benefits, and who's responsible for what. And I think what you're about to see and listen is one example of our amazing students who are in your district. And we're a 7th through 12 district. You can imagine when we start this in 7th grade all the way to 12th grade, right? What type of kids are coming out of Anaheim Union. So I am very, very proud of the teachers who've done so much work unleashing the student voices in our district. So we have a young lady that's going to share her soapbox speech, a senior from Magnolia High School. Notice the clapping started from a Magnolia teacher right here. So let's give it up for Leticia Alvarado Franco.
Hello everyone, my name is Leticia, and I guess I'll get started now. At the age of 8, I spent my evenings brewing coffee for my mother at 10 o'clock p.m. before locking the door behind her as she left for work and putting my siblings to bed. My story began with burnt coffee grounds on a dimly lit stove. Over 20,000 AUHSD students, according to the Department of Education, identify as low income. We spend our evenings riding the bus home or working afternoon shifts to support our families. However, despite the work that bus riders and part-time student workers pour into their education, the reality is that disparities and lack of access to educational resources continues to inhibit our college success. With intensive tutoring, upwards of $1,500, at the disposal of children whose parents fall under the higher income tax brackets, students without these same opportunities fall at an incredible disadvantage. And research exemplifies this gap quite clearly. According to the National Institute of Health, lower as measured through academic assessments fell on average 3 academic years behind their higher income counterparts. And even with local schools implementing free after-school tutoring programs, the reality is that staying after school might not be feasible for thousands of students. For bus riders, staying until 5 o'clock p.m. translates into rushing home at 6 o'clock p.m. or even arriving later into the day. As such, our time spent attending after-school tutoring often comes at the expense of compromising family responsibilities. We need support that works for us. But with the rise of generative AI tools, we might just hold the key to maximizing student potential. Where students previously lacked access, time, and resources to attend after-school tutoring, we now have the ability to leverage AI. Able to summarize data at any grade level, tools such as ChatGPT can easily adapt to the unique needs of our struggling students. In fact, research conducted by Carnegie Mellon University determined that after receiving assistance from AI, in addition to in-person instruction, 83% of participants increased their subject test scores. That is to say that combining teacher assistance in the classroom with generative AI tools could further support low-income students in overcoming educational barriers. Imagine a world where, as students arrive home from their afternoon shifts or return from picking their siblings up from school, they no longer feel unsupported in their academic endeavors. Instead, with the touch of a button, students can now access personalized support to understand Shakespeare or the answer to a 3-hour-long calculus problem. Whether it's by speaking at our school meetings, or we can all play our part in helping the bus riders that live within our local communities. Through our advocacy for ethical AI use, we can advance equity in schools both locally and at the national level. 16 and 17, we still brew coffee for our parents. We still put our siblings to bed every evening. And with the support of our teachers, districts, communities, and most importantly, AI, we look forward to a future brighter than the light on the stove. Thank you.
Thank you, Leticia, for sharing those amazing insights and perspectives with us this morning. Another round of applause for Leticia Alvarado Franco, Magnolia High School. What a great way to start the day. Now let's keep things going with an outstanding fireside chat on the important subject of how we can develop AI strategies to advance equity. Our fireside chat today is moderated by Kenji Traynor, Vice President of Partnerships and Learning at the Stewart Foundation, and includes Antero Garcia, Professor in the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University and Vice President of the National Council of Teachers of English, and Rudy Escobar, the STEM and Computer Science Coordinator for the Stanislaus County Office of Education. Let's give him a hand as we're getting set up here. Take it away, Kenji.
Good morning. With you, I am Kenji Traynor, Vice President at the Stewart Foundation. Of course, want to start by expressing big thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in the conference. For those of you who reviewed the app and the program, I'm not Sophie Finelli, who is the president of the foundation. Unfortunately, got stuck with some family obligations at home, but I'm so pleased to be here with you all. Of course, if I had a choice, would not have wanted to follow Leticia. I mean, amazing. Like, what a hard act to follow. So, you know, we have just deep appreciation to Superintendent Mike Matsuda and everyone at Anaheim Union for organizing this amazing gathering, and of course for all of the sponsors and panelists and contributors. So it's really just been a fantastic event so far. And you know, reflecting back, given this topic of AI and equity, so happy to have heard this theme and set of questions and tensions come up already so much through yesterday. You know, Mike actually opened with this powerful framing story of Prometheus and fire and how humans were given this power that they didn't. That really needs to be core from our humanity. So, you know, these were critical cautions because, of course, we now have AI to sit on top of these, what we know are existing inequities in our society. Of course, the pandemic made that so clear. Yesterday, we heard from Jean-Claude and Alex and Mary Jo about equity concerns with AI, including access challenges, major disparities in who gets connected, in what ways they get connected, biases in algorithms and LLMs. You know, I was struck in that session in particular by a comment that LLMs cannot realistically become unbiased really anytime soon, and that it's important and necessary to provide feedback to developers and a combination of domain expertise and experimentation will make AI better and less harmful. You know, that sounds very clear and practical, and I get it, but it also struck me personally as placing a burden to some degree on users. And we know that the least resourced and the least powerful among us, including many young people, are going to have not such a strong ability to carry that burden, but they're definitely going to bear you know, the greatest harms from these biases that go unaddressed. Dr. On, directly, I think, just challenged this question about equity around amplification and intention. Are we going to acknowledge and address equity in AI? What is this sorting function that we know schools were sort of set up to ration out opportunities? And how can AI be used to either reduce those disparities with intentionality, or are we just going to let the power of AI actually amplify who's already advantaged and who's already getting left behind? I personally, in one of the breakout sessions, went to hear from Dr. Allison Scott and Shana White from the Caper Foundation about how they're putting equity front and center through this deep work, helping educators and students and others examine AI in the context of education. Why, I think fundamentally in that session, the question was asked, why should we allow AI to impact us like other prior technologies when companies, quote unquote, moved fast and broke things, instead of taking very, very seriously the moral and practical obligations to just do deeper thinking about what the negative impacts can be from supercharged algorithms and AI tools, and who's going to bear those costs. So these two women, Allison and Shana, are amazing. Their work is super, super powerful, and they've made it all available to you right here in a guide on responsible tech justice and AI. So please check it out, kaporfoundation.org. We heard yesterday at lunch from Gabby Lopez at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, really that like dignity and belonging and engendering our humanity, that is so much the core purpose of education and schooling that can never be replaced and should not be diminished either by AI or other technologies. And Gabby's comments about the humanness of the education endeavor reminded me of lessons from Michael Fullen's work also about adults in the system and understanding that human beings and our cultures and our mindsets fundamentally drive systems. And AI can help change more positively those things or just continue to reinforce how we're set up with inequities. So at the very end of the day, I was in a packed room with educators and very much district leaders who were hungry for like the most practical of practical information and support on things like policies and guardrails around AI. What is acceptable use? And there was very much a sense in the room of chief business officers and litigation and financial liability and all of those things, but there was just as much this like very protective desire for young people and adults to have a sense of safety and security. And the risks are really, really real. Data privacy and ransom attacks and geolocation and targeting and all of those things. And so for young people who may already be vulnerable due to other kinds of inequities in their lives, what is the responsibility of every teacher and every district to mitigate what might be unequal risks also online and with school provided AI applications? So, given all of these ideas and discussions that have already surfaced, it's really a privilege to be able to moderate this conversation with Antero and Rudy as two experts who are going to share their thoughts about equity in AI this morning. And while they're not here on stage, I also feel like definitely have to express real big gratitude to the folks at the UCLA Computer Science Equity Project, particularly Dr. Jean Ryu and Dr. Roxana Haddad, who were just generous and giving as planning contributors as we tried to think about this session. And I know I've been talking for a bit, but before I turn to Rudy and Antero, wanted to offer just a point of view about the Stewart Foundation. Who are we? Why are we even here? We come to this discussion as a foundation that's not technology focused, frankly. We're not born out of a technology company like Chan Zuckerberg Initiative or Google.org. We're a family foundation, and we were formed nearly 40 years ago. We're really committed to supporting life outcomes for young people through education. Since 2020, we've been reflecting a lot on what we already know about adolescent development in particular, that for adolescents, it is this critical period of human development and major physical changes, puberty, no fun, but also, hyper malleable brain growth, the same as in early childhood, honestly. And these very other consequential social and emotional and identity changes are happening in adolescence, but those are built from the experiences and the relationships that adolescents can have. And so at the foundation, we're really driven by this belief that adolescence is not too late to find purpose and to find passion, to learn how to learn, which came up yesterday, to struggle and become proficient at engaging with people that are like really different from ourselves, right? This cross-tribe experience, if we're participating together in school, all of those things are going to have implications and affected by the learning environments that young people are in. So at the Stewart Foundation, we also draw from decades of work that is not focused on education, but actually on young people in the child welfare system and experiencing foster care. And we know that these youth, along with many, many other systems involve young people, whether that's the criminal justice system or homelessness and the public sheltering system, you know, many of these young people are already experiencing really unfair and unjust costs from the role of algorithms and AI in how these systems behave and operate. The National Center for Youth Law, which really focuses on a civil rights frame for young people, is going to be releasing very, very soon some recommendations about policies to protect children and young people in an AI-powered world, including beyond education, because as we already know, more than 50% of American young people have integrated AI into their lives somehow, whether in or out of school. It's like, these are the generations that cannot escape. They're living with technology woven into all aspects of their lives. More than a third of students are using AI tools not for schoolwork, but actually to learn about and deal with anxiety and mental health issues. I mean, amidst a crisis of social connection, do young people need more adult human engagement or simply communication with chatbots to like find their way to greater well-being? And in some of these most sensitive areas of young people's lives around education and health and safety, public systems are using AI tools for surveillance and for profiling, particularly with immigration and criminal justice. They are applying biased diagnostics and intervention actions in healthcare, and to some degree in personalized learning, particularly around disability responses. And again, the background that we have around young people in the child welfare system, you have AI-determined family removal and foster placement recommendations and decisions happening already. And so given those realities and harms, the National Center for Youth Law is really putting forward this idea of a civil rights framework for young people in AI. And I think in education, the question I have for us is whether we've thought enough about that kind of civil rights frame, and are the potential harms in education just as stark as what we're seeing some young people experience outside of school. So the Stewart Foundation, most simply, we're focused on these two high priorities of supporting all of California's adolescents to thrive and then transforming systems for equity. So we believe in the immeasurable potential of young people, despite what any AI-powered prediction of their future might say. We're all in on them, and we are really certain that public systems are going to remain essential for any kind of social contract that supports dignity and equity for everyone across society. So given, of course, that next Tuesday is California's primary, we view public education also as core to a healthy and functioning democracy. And that, of course, is the means that we have for establishing and upholding any kind of social contract. So I'll step off my own soapbox now and turn it over to Antero and Rudy, but just wanted to offer some of those thoughts to get us started. And for Antero and Rudy, would love maybe for you all to start the discussion with your thoughts about how AI is often framed as a tool for efficiency, particularly in education. But what about equity and what about authenticity? What are your views on some of those things, whether that's authentic learning and teaching, or as we already heard, authentic voice and expression from young people?
Yeah. Thank you. There's a nice, we get the fire picture here, so it can kind of warm our hands up in front of us. I'm thinking about authenticity and efficiency together, particularly to Leticia's words and in her soapbox. And I really appreciate the way that, I'm looking at her, so it's a big room, but I really appreciate the way that you they really reminded us, I think, of the most disruptive and powerful form of technology that's shaping schools right now, and that's the school bus. It's not Gen AI, right? I just want to recognize that every day in California, except on the weekend, Saturday, 700,000 kids get on a school bus in this country, in this state alone, right? And we can think of the ways, and my research team and I have argued that the school bus is the most disruptive form of educational technology to ever shape US schools, setting aside every single form of technology that might be on your minds in this room right now, right? None of them come close to the ways that students' lives are disrupted for the sake of efficiency, right? Not for the sake of authenticity, right? It is efficient to get kids in the name of school desegregation, in the name of equity, to get kids from one place to another, and we treat them like cargo in these spaces, right? And so I just want to kind of like acknowledge the kind of, we'll talk about downstream effects, I think, later in this conversation, but kind of acknowledge the kinds of long-term effects of what's it mean to spend thousands of hours on a school bus across your K-12 schooling experience, right? What does that do instructionally, pedagogically, right? And if we think of that as a kind of beginning thinking activity, we can now kind of think through similarly, right? What are the ways where implicitly tools like Gen AI, right, large language models might also over time shape our dispositions, shape our assumptions of what our participation in society, in a healthy functioning democracy can look like, right? And so I just want to like name that as a starting place. As a former English teacher, as someone who cares about English, I think it's the most important subject. I'm biased about this. Go English teachers, by the way. So as someone who cares a lot about English, we talk a lot about authentic voice, right? And we talk a lot about authentic voice, and most of the ways that we assess in English classrooms and that teachers are evaluated in English classrooms is our ability to regurgitate generic arguments, right? Argumentation and persuasion are the name of the game in this moment of Common Core, in this moment of the rise of science of reading, again, kind of thinking through what are the trends that are happening in ELA spaces. And so when I think about authentic voice, right, I think of the many inauthentic ways that textbook companies, that teacher education programs tend to focus on what is supposed to happen in English classrooms, even though that doesn't look like what reading and writing looks like outside of school, right? I would argue, because I'm a professor, I like to argue, I guess, to my in-laws' chagrin, I would argue that that kids today read and write more than any other generation, right? They spend most of their time recreationally reading multimodal complex texts that we don't count as reading in schools, right? That we don't assess. Also, I'm not advocating that we assess these, by the way. That's not the goal. But I would argue that knowing that we're in this hyper-literate moment as a society, right, is the best we can do. Use Gen AI to write a better version of the Great Gatsby essay, right? I want to put that up as like the straw horse argument that I don't think most of you actually are advocating for in this room, but kind of hold that up as that we can do better in schools because we know kids do better outside of schools, right? And wondering what that bridge might look like, maybe as a starting place for a push towards authenticity as a way to getting towards equity.
It's a hard act to follow. So yeah, building on what you just said about the authenticity of how to adjust to what's happening in the classrooms, and it makes me think about how we used to teach in the past and how we are having to teach now. And I think about, I've always thought about AI being an efficiency tool, just that, nothing else. Creativity, critical thinking, it's always coming from the human being. And we have to think about how can we get our students to continue building that momentum, to continue having those critical thinking skills, to continue having the authenticity of their own voice involved into AI. We have to be very careful not to worry only about the tools and what the tools can do, but what are those tools doing and how are we actually having our students involving in these tools? And I think that that's extremely important. I always think about right now that big term, prompt engineering, right? That's a big term right now. There's a prompt engineering pathway, I guess. And that we know pathway, I guess, is going to go away because the more those language models get trained, the better they're going to become. But problem formulation will not go away. And we need to think about how, as teachers, we can get our students to continue building that critical thinking skills for problem solving, That's really where the student voice comes into place. That's when they really can give their own ideas, their own thinking. And we got to be careful not to standardize it to where everybody uses the tool, everybody uses the same thing, everybody gets that opportunity, because then we take the creativity away.
I mean, I think I would just add to the, I agree with you, unfortunately. I wish we had an argument. But I would add, in addition to bringing in student voice, right, I think the voice that oftentimes is missing in these conversations is teacher voice too, right? That anytime, again, I teach at Stanford, so you can see the Google buses just kind of going by us, right? You see the Facebook buses kind of going by. I guess I'm really fixed on buses. Apparently, this is that's what I'm really charging against. But you are immersed in the workforce there, and oftentimes when we think about educational technology and we think about the tools that happen in classrooms, these are tools that are largely created not by teachers, or oftentimes not with the input of teachers. Maybe they come in as like an advisory or like a test group at the end, kind of rubber stamp, I think, what someone else made because that's what they think kids need, and it can be sold to districts and ways to make lots of money on teachers and kids, right? And so I just want to recognize that oftentimes what I worry about maybe in this room, in these conversations, are the ways that we overlook teacher expertise and assume that teachers are not the experts in these classrooms, right? And so I just want to acknowledge this is a key part of, yeah, clap for teachers, that's great. Just obviously acknowledge, right, that teachers in this moment, I can't difficult it is to be a teacher right now, given all of this, right, everything, right? I'm just going to point existentially to the world, and thinking about kind of what that means. So recognizing how difficult it is to be a teacher and a student right now, I think gets us to the real heart of authenticity to some extent, right? So what are authentic tools? A lot of my early research was on the use of cell phones in classrooms. It's outdated now because everybody's figured out how to use cell phones in classrooms, so we don't worry about it anymore. And that's actually not the case, right? We're still regularly worrying about turn away your devices, turn off your devices. And the reason we're in this problem today is because no one has taught adults how to properly use your cell phone, right? You are all, I'm gonna blame all of you. You are all at the dinner table on your cell phone, right? Getting yelled at by your spouse. The authentic ways that we as adults use tools penalizes what kids do with their tools in schools, right? It's probably a similar kind of challenge we're going to face with Gen AI, right? That the ways kids actually want to use technology like ChatGPT, like DALL-E, like whatever the next thing is, right? With the video production stuff that's coming, right? The ways that kids are actually going to want to use that allowed, right? We're going to find ways to build up structures around it to remove the authenticity from these tools, unless we are actively working with teachers and young people along all of these steps. I think that's just one design consideration for us to think about.
I like that you bring that up because something that really caught my attention this morning when we were having breakfast, hearing the different types of level of understanding of AI for educators. And when I think about bringing in those teacher voices, we need to think about all teachers. And we need to think about not only, which is typically what happens, or we get the ones that are above the level of ed tech understanding. We need to bring in those teachers that have zero knowledge of AI, zero understanding of AI, because their voice also matters, and they have to think about how can they actually bring in, what's the barrier, what are some of the things that can make it more difficult for them, and what are some of the fears that come out of this work.
So thinking about what is already happening, what is sort of in this near-term reality of education and AI, and Antero, you touched on this, we also know that there's going to be to hear from both of you about what questions you think we should be asking ourselves around those potential long-term impacts. What are you seeing in your imagination? What are you worried about, and around the future of the long-term impact that AI-powered tools can have in education?
I'd like to start with thinking about what will AI do, so 5 times, because it'll be about 35 years above anything else that we do. But I like to think about what is the impact that it's going to have in our social interaction, and how our students are going to be socializing. Are they going to be socializing with a human being, or are they going to socialize with an AI? And is that going to, we are so working so hard to do now. So it's very important to think about what are those things that are going to be touching later on if we just allow AI to take over. We need to actually have an opportunity for students to have still the interaction. I like to think about AI being AI, but not making AI the main tool. And that's important to think about for students to have an interaction, educators also to have that interaction, but don't allow it to become the number one thing. As well as how are those models being impacted? I mentioned a little bit ago about they're going to become better. Those models are going to become better. What we're feeding into those models, all of us, for example, when you put a prompt in ChatGPT, what are we putting in there? What are we actually guiding it to do? That is a long-term impact, because that is something that, depending on what we feed it, that's what it's going to give us back. It's a garbage in, garbage out idea. That's extremely important to think about.
I think about the long term, and I mentioned this earlier, I think about long term as maybe like upstream, downstream. So, if you, or downwind, right? So if you were near some kind of industrial space, right? Like what are the downstream impacts of living around there? And so I just want to name kind of like very, very literally the environmental impact of Gen AI, right? Like the huge kind of energy use that we're talking about here in a moment when our world is on fire feels like a thing we should probably be thinking about, right? If we're worried about the future of kids, maybe we should think about energy consumption. Just seems like a basic thing that I don't know how to fix that. But I don't think most of us in this room do either, and that seems like a problem. So I just want to acknowledge that, right? This is, at least for most of us who live in California, I didn't know the word atmospheric river until recently, and now it seems like a thing that we just regularly have to encounter. So thank you, climate change, I guess, right, in terms of like what this means as a space. So I just want to like recognize there's some long-term impacts that we don't talk about and don't think about how to mitigate in this moment, right, in ways that I think are pretty scary and are going to directly impact the lives of our children. So I want to name that. I think a moment from my mother-in-law. I love her very dearly, and I think of during Christmas, she wanted to play this like Christmas playlist that she saw somewhere on her Alexa. And she and her Alexa had like a real tiff. They had a real moment in the kitchen together where she got, like her voice got like quieter and quieter and more stern, right? It's like, Alexa, I need you to play. And she could, I feel like you've seen this interaction. And it's like, I love this moment, right? Because I think it shows, the ways that we communicate with robots. And there's a question around civility, right? And should we speak lovingly to robots or not, right? Is that kind of thing to think about. But I do recognize that with ChatGPT as maybe a placeholder for Gen AI tools in general, there's a way where we are programming young people to figure out how to effectively communicate with robots in order to elicit the information that we want, where that is time that we could spend thinking more effectively about how to communicate democratically with each other, right? And yes, these tools are going to get better at us being intuitive with them and kind of being conversational. That's great, right? But the more and more time we spend on how do I revise my prompt in order for Gen AI to give me the right kind of response, right, is more time spent from looking at each other, right, and thinking about these assistive agents. And so I worry about the long-term impacts of what's it mean to communicate with robots and teach young people how to communicate with robots in lieu of the kind of increasingly limited time of talking with one another, right? I think there's ways where Gen AI tools are going to mitigate some of this and are going to support face-to-face interactions, but I don't think that is going to be a fix-all, right? So I just want to recognize that, to me, the most sacred thing that can happen in schools is for kids and teachers to have a thriving, loving, joyful environment where they get to interact with each other that is as tool-free as possible, right? There are very few places where that happen, and they have difficult conversations, right? So a long-term impact that will be uncomfortable to acknowledge, right? But a long-term impact is that we are always excited to talk about educational technology, right? As a field, as educators, as folks in this field, right? This is a space that we will always show up, and parents and teachers and students are going to be supportive of this in general, right? There is data that shows that this is going to improve long-term outcomes, right? We are very, very afraid to have difficult, quote unquote, controversial conversations in schools, right? There is a highly contested presidential election. I don't know if you know this, right? There's an election year. Get this, let me tell you something you haven't heard about. There's a presidential election happening, right? There are multiple global wars, right, that students do not feel safe talking about in schools. Teachers do not feel safe talking about in schools, right? And we do not have space to talk about it here because it's not the focus of this conference, right? But our ability to not have those conversations is teaching intense amounts of information to young people about what is valued in schools and what's not valued in schools. We value the teaching about Gen AI and learning how to do that better, but not about teaching about the kind of real world crises that we're going to throw on the laps of young people, right? And so I think that is a long-term impact that we've been encountering for a long time.
To add on to that, I think that also something to consider that it's a long-term effect is the digital divide. We already are in a digital divide, and now by bringing AI and giving the opportunity for certain schools or certain districts to have the opportunity to have these AI tools or the AI type of models, it's going to create that digital divide that is going to be a lot greater than what we have now. I have experience with, in the same school system, division between some groups are getting AI and some are not. And we know very well who are those, the ones that get that opportunity. So I have fear of that's going to become a greater issue because, like you said, it has to do with a lot of where that money is being spent, where everything is going. So we need to also think about how can we make this more equitable, where everybody gets the opportunity and not just use it as one place.
I feel like, Rudy, that feels like a, this feels like an opportunity to actually say something positive about Gen AI, as someone who's been really down on it in this conversation. I'll say, like, particularly to the digital divide, you know, I've been doing a lot of work with individuals who are labeled as undocumented in this country. And one of the tools that I've been working with them around is using ChatGPT as a writing tool for translation, right? And so just recognizing like the great leveling function of if you have an OpenAI account, you can basically translate things effectively and free and almost instantaneously, participate in the business world through email and conversation in ways that probably weren't accessible to you before, right? And I just want to recognize like this is like a really powerful tool for second language learners, for individuals who might not feel comfortable in particularly communicating in standard academic English. And just this is a really powerful opportunity that I don't think we broadly teach effectively. So just I think, yay, this is probably a bigger call for the digital divide work.
Mm-hmm.
So particularly given all of those dynamics, and I think with the backdrop, for example, in a formal way of participation in civics and democracy, but even in other ways, and again, as we heard from Leticia earlier, this sense of voice and agency is key. And so, you know, any other additional thoughts about how you think a sense of agency in the world for young people might be impacted by, you know, by AI and maybe these dynamics around, you know, being a consumer or a creator, or as you said, Antero already, you know, like AI for whom and in service of what?
You want to? Sure. I think when I think about the agency piece, I wonder where can young people see their lives affirmed in these tools? Dr. Rudy and Sims Bishop has this kind of foundational idea of windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors, right? And oftentimes, and this is kind of key theory for young adult literature, children's literature, that young people should be able to pick up a text and see their lives affirmed in those texts, right? Or see someone else's life as a window into other kinds of possibilities, right? And I wonder, right? So thinking of the biases questions. Bias question, there's a plural thing that's going to drive me nuts now. Me driving home later, like it was a biases. But kind of like thinking of biases in Gen AI tools, when do young people see their lives affirmed, right? When you type in engineer, right? Does that engineer look like the person that looks like you, right? June, when you created the picture of yourself, right, in your slide, right? Does it look like you? It kind of looks like you. It's pretty good. Ish, right? It's good. And so, like all of these kinds of things, right? Like, do you see yourself affirmed? Like, do you see your lived experiences? When you, I had a student write down, like, what is the most popular fruit in ChatGPT? And it's an apple. And then tried to say, what is the most popular fruit in Cairo? And it still said Apple, even though maybe it's pomegranate. Like we kind of think through, like there is a Western bias that exists in these tools presently. And so wondering, where do we see ourselves affirmed feels like one piece of that agency aspect, right? But the other side of agency is oftentimes, to me, I think about agency as tied to, like, what do you get to do with this, right? And so when it comes to teachers and what happens in schools, most of the ways we think of digital citizenship or online civic reasoning or media literacy as kind of like some buckets are around kind of like two foundational pieces that teachers are told to spend most of their time. So one is about safety and civility, right? This idea of like you need kids to be safe and not bully each other and like stay safe in spaces. That's probably important. We spend an inordinate amount of time on that rather than fostering agency, right? And the other side is around interpreting misinformation, right? And I think increasingly as we get to multimodal work with Gen AI, we're gonna spend a lot more instructional time on the tools for like, does it pass the CRAP test, right? Can you look at the kind of different kinds of media literacy tools in order to understand if this is a real piece of information or if this is fake, right? And those are gonna get harder and harder, which means it's gonna suck up more and more of our instructional energy on rooting out deep fakes, rooting out fake information, disinformation in ways that are gonna be really pernicious for this existing democratic crises that we're in. But on the other hand, the more time we spend on that, the less time we spend on agency and on allowing young people's voices to lead us and to ask critical questions and to innovate and to think through what powerful possibilities might exist. And so I think those are kind of like key foundational pieces. I'm also just in the back of my mind, and I don't know how to link this together, but I'm just gonna say it out loud. Yesterday was the 21st anniversary of the Department of Homeland Security, right? It was like a massive data space, right? One of like the key agencies that uses the kinds of text that we're talking about in this space. And so recognizing, right, the kinds of long-term impacts of these spaces and the ways they've changed what it means to be a young person in this country feels like an agentic conversation to kind of hold on to as a starting place.
I think about student voice and agency are really what's going to move our society to strive. And the opportunity to have them interact with AI, what are those tasks that we're giving or we're providing for students to interact with versus what are the tasks that students are going to interact with? I feel like we have to be cautious to allow students to use AI for certain tasks, but don't allow it to take the personal part of it, that voice, right? Because it is important for them to continue having those conversations. Arturo, you mentioned something about giving them opportunities to discuss those democratic systems, discuss those ideas, giving the opportunity, those tasks for them to have voice in everything they do. And use AI for efficiency, but not substituting it for the opportunity of agency.
There's so many more possible questions here about, for example, who owns young people's data and the portability and the transferability and as you talk about the Department of Homeland Security in 20 plus years, will this data ever go away or will it continue to follow and haunt young people? I wish we could get into that question and other questions, but we're actually coming right up on time, and so wanted to just throw both of you more of an open invitation. Is there anything else that you've been thinking about and that you feel like this particular group of folks really, you want to share with them about this question of equity and AI, and maybe a minute, 2 minutes each, and we can wrap.
So I'm going to speak from my own perspective and my own lens. And last thing I want to really, with all these educators here to think about is AI is here. It's not going to go away. The question is, how are we going to use it? And I like the analogy of the fire, right? Are we going to use it to make things better and have efficiency, or are we going to use it to make things that can be destructible? And that question is always, no matter what choices we make, when we think about policy, when we think about student agency, when we think about the classroom itself and what are the things that we're using in the classroom, think always about what are the two sides. There's always two sides to AI. What are the benefits and what are the disadvantages of it? And think about it that way as you bring in AI into your systems. I
was telling this story to some teachers at UC Irvine a month ago, so hopefully this doesn't repeat for anyone in the room. But I have 4-year-old twins. They're monsters. And one of their favorite books is called There's a Monster at the End of This Book. Sesame nods. I see the parents in the room. Some of you are like, what are you talking about? But the rest of you, I see you. And so this book is about Grover from Sesame Street, and I'm going to ruin this book for you, by the way, if you're worried about it. And turn the page, he's like, I can't believe you've done this. You're getting closer to the end of the book, right? And if you finish the book, I guess. And at the end, it turns out that Grover is the monster at the end of the book, right? And this book was not written as a cautionary tale for ed tech people in general. But I think about it, right, in terms of, right, is the monster by us in the room, right? I think of this maybe from like a Ship of Theseus kind of way of like, we've thought of these kinds of challenges in different kinds of ways with different kinds of tools, and maybe this is different, maybe it's not, right? But if we look at the history of educational technology, one of my former colleagues, Larry Cuban, spent a long time thinking about the histories of ed tech in the United States since like the 1920s, since a century ago, right? And thinking through the kinds of continuing crises that we've worried about, the existential threats to what happens to classrooms, right? I think largely the same is that classrooms still kind of look like classrooms, right? That is one of the most resilient things that happen, right? For better or worse for young people, classrooms continue to be what classrooms are. And if we are not going to disrupt the traditional core model of what happens in schools, not through an app, but through policy, through hard work, through reimagining our workforce, nothing substantive is going to change around us, as much as the world might be eroding at the same time. So I just want to acknowledge Grover as our prognosticator in this space, maybe as a final thought.
So thanks to Rudy and Antero. Thank you all for being here. It was a joy to spend Saturday morning with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, this amazing panel, for your authenticity and real-world perspectives this morning. Let's give Kenji, Antero, and Rudy another round of applause. If you are looking for presenter slide decks from the AI Summit, we have some amazing content on the AI Summit website. We'll put a QR code up on the screen. Check it out to connect with our AI Summit content and resources. Presenters, if you haven't yet shared your resources with Brian Brady,